Welcome. Thank you all for joining our event today. My name is Elizabeth Byers, and I'm a research associate at the Partnership for Public Service. We're delighted to have you join the partnership and Medallia today to discuss our research report, Behind the Scenes and Customer Experience with Mission Support Services in Government. A few logistical notes before we begin. I first want to let you know that this event is being recorded and will be made available on the partnership's website for folks who weren't able to join. During the event, we ask that you remain muted to minimize background noise. You can check that you're muted in the bottom left corner of your Zoom window. And we would also recommend that you view the event in speaker view for the best viewing experience today. If you have any technical problems during the event, please let us know. We will be leaving time at the end of today's event for questions from the audience. So if you have questions for our panelists at any time during today's discussion, please feel free to type them into the chat, and our moderator will be taking questions from the chat to put to our panelists. I'd now like to turn it over to Lauren DeYoung-Schulman, Vice President for Research, Analysis, and Evaluation at the Partnership. Lauren?
Thanks, Liz. As Liz said, I'm Lauren DeYoung-Schulman. I lead research at the Partnership, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you this afternoon. For those of you who are new to our organization, the Partnership for Public Service is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that strives to make government more effective and efficient. And this report, Behind the Scenes, that we're talking about today is really emblematic of that work, highlighting real needs and real progress that's mostly out of the spotlight for the public eye, but makes a huge difference in government's ability to execute missions that no other entities can do. So the Partnership and Medallia released Behind the Scenes in February, after several months of studying how federal mission support offices can help their agencies meet big challenges by becoming more customer focused. And I think there's a real misconception that such work is best when it's invisible. And that couldn't be more off base in so many ways. Mission support services, whether it be IT or HR or procurement or financial management, are absolutely essential to the ability of federal agencies to carry out their programs and to fulfill their missions. They're the 911 call, they are the welcome mat, they are the crutch when you really need assistance, the enabler that really empowers talented civil servants like so many of you in the audience around the world to do your jobs. And to do that, though, mission support offices have to be able to understand in detail and meet the complex needs of federal employees where they serve in so many different capacities. So today's discussion is going to focus on strategies for incorporating customer experience principles into mission support services and try to share some examples about how these principles have helped federal mission support offices navigate the coronavirus pandemic, which has provided so many challenges to this universe. We are really excited to dive more deeply into the details of Behind the Scenes and to hear the experiences of our speakers and those in the audience, everything that you have to offer. And we're incredibly grateful to our partners, Medallia, for their support of this event and our research, and look forward to continuing the collaboration with them and all of you. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to my colleague, Zachary Tojak, who is the Area Vice President for Medallia, to give some additional welcoming remarks. Zach?
Thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. Like Lauren, excited to be here, excited for the research that has gone into kind of bringing this day to this culmination events. For those who don't know about Medallia, we are a customer experience technology firm, have the opportunity to work across both public and private sector, helping agencies and industries really of all shapes and sizes better understand the experiences that their customers and employees are having and how those experiences can be improved, really leading to operational improvements and transformative outcomes. For the last 5 years, it's been my honor to work closely with a number of federal agencies, really trying to take that mindset and apply it to what we're trying to achieve every day in government, striving to help increase the trust that the public has in federal agencies, trying to really improve that mission alignment that we all strive for each and every day. And as time has progressed, it only really made sense that we take that lens that is so often focused outward and looking at the experiences that citizens are having with the government services and flip that inward and really understanding the impact that mission support services have on delivering those exceptional services to the public, and that if we can apply those same thoughts and best practices to the way in which employees are engaging and activating, it's going to have a trickle-down effect, not only to just their engagement, enthusiasm, retention, and things of that but also into the impacts that they're able to deliver to the citizens on an end-to-end basis. As Lauren mentioned, this has never been more important now than ever, given the pandemic response and everything that we've been going through. So I'll cut my remarks off there with just final thoughts of it was an honor, as always, to work with our friends at the partnership on this critical research, and moreover, an honor to hear from so many great government leaders who shared their time and their stories with us. And echoing the sentiments already brought forward, we want to bring those to light and share those so that they can be leveraged by others across government. So again, thank you all for your time this afternoon. Really excited for the discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Eric Keller from the partnership to take us through the high-level research overview.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Excited to have everyone here today. See a lot of familiar names on the top of the screen there. So glad folks were able to join us. I'm Eric Keller. I lead our customer experience work at the partnership. I'm going to share a quick overview of the report that we put out today, along with Lee Becker from Medallia. Lee, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly before we get started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric. Yep, Lee Becker here. Been in government for over 22 years on DoD and VA side, also on the healthcare side as well. I've just been honored to be part of this report, this process, highlighting really the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, and just honored to be here with you to share with Eric the findings of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. So we will tell you a little bit about what we learned in our research before we get into a fantastic panel discussion in a few minutes. So if we could go to the first slide. We had really the main goal of doing this work was to understand how some of the principles and ideas of customer experience could be applied in the unique context of mission support services in government. Again, we're talking about HR and IT, financial management, acquisition. We know that these services have unique circumstances and constraints where they're working under. And we wanted to hear about some successful customer experience stories in these services, especially when it comes to how government was responding to and dealing with some of the challenges in completing its work during the coronavirus pandemic. So this is really work that we had started back in 2019 with Medallia. We put out a report called Colleagues as Customers, where we looked at some data from GSA surveys and identified agencies that seem to have really high satisfaction with their mission support services. And then we asked them some of the things that they were doing to improve. How are they listening to customers? How are they measuring performance? How are they using human-centered design in their organizations? We highlighted some of that work in 2019. Then 2020 came, the world changed, and we really wanted to dig into this issue of what role is mission support playing to help agencies meet the challenges of the pandemic. So we had an interview series where we talked to about a dozen different leaders across a dozen different agencies. And that was really the foundation of the report. We called the report Behind the Scenes. And the reason we did that, as we were doing this work, we started to see this very clear link as to how better mission support services could lead to better government overall and better services for the public. And to illustrate that, there's a kind of theater analogy, which people in the customer experience community may be familiar with, where every customer experience has a front stage and a backstage, and then a lot more going on behind the scenes. So the front stage, that's what the public sees. It's the online system where they apply for benefits, or the service center that they walk into. But there's also the backstage, all of the operations that are directly supporting the front stage. Maybe these are systems or technology or databases that agents have to access when they're serving customers. In addition, there's also this fundamental work that's happening behind the scenes, which really make both the backstage and the front stage possible. Do you have the people in place in your organization that you need? Do you have the budget? Do you have the rules and policies that will guide how people work, the technology, the goods and services that you need? And our report really makes the case that this behind the scenes activity is essential to creating a good experience for the public and helping agencies address big challenges. To give you an example, that we saw play out in the pandemic, some agencies didn't have at first the technology that they needed to move staff to remote work. They didn't have telework policies in place to be able to do that. And in those organizations, you saw that the public experienced challenges and for a little while potentially weren't able to access services or get things done. Our report provides some positive examples of this in the TSA and the Bureau of Fiscal Service, where a customer focus before the pandemic really paid off when the pandemic hit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during our panel. But we think there's a real lesson here for the new Biden-Harris administration, especially as they start to formulate their management agenda and management priorities. The last two presidential administrations, customer experience has been a big piece of that management agenda. But it's been mostly focused on what the public sees. And we think that the administration could really make improving customer experience with mission support services part of its management agenda. Otherwise, you don't really have the full picture of what needs to happen in government to eventually deliver that service or that program to the public. So we make the case of why this is important in the report. We also note that government does have room to improve. This is data from the GSA Customer Satisfaction Survey that looks across most CFO Act agencies in government. And most of government's customers are rating their mission support services a 4 or a 5 on a 7-point scale. Certainly kind of lukewarm satisfaction with those services. In fact, out of the 96 offices that the survey looked at, only one, which is the IT office at the National Science Foundation, on average was rated a 6 or above, which is really, what you would be looking for really strong levels of satisfaction. So we think government has room to improve. Good news is improving is possible. Across these 96 offices, 64 saw their score either go up or hold steady in 2020. Only about a third saw their scores went down. So government is working on this issue. Many organizations are improving, and our report lays out a guide for mission support leaders with some tips and strategies for how to get this done. And I want to turn it over to Lee now, who's going to share some of those tips and strategies, both from the report and from Lee's experience leading this work in a large government agency.
Thank you so much, Eric. At first, I love the, and hopefully the audience does as well, everyone does as well, the thinking through the framework of the front stage to backstage, behind the scenes. It's very vivid for me. And I think one of that as a outcome of the research is one of the key points and one of the key takeaways. I think if that could be it, that would be huge, because without the behind the scenes, the front stage and backstage don't work. And what I love, we're going to have the panel shortly with leaders and BFS and TSA to share some of the goodness that they've done. But there's so many other agencies as well, like, with EPA, we'll talk about too, the VA and others that have really kind of harnessed it. Because frankly, as a government employee, I remember, many of you can relate, is when we think about the pain of getting the mission done, we always think about, HR or IT, contracting, right? We talk about it all the time, right? That's the reality. So even though 12% of the workforce of the federal workforce is mission support, that 12%, they're mighty, and we need to do all we can to help enable that. And what's exciting, I think one of the key insights is that the reality is that when we think about customers, there's internal customers, right? So you have the external customers, but you also have the internal customers aspect. So how can we, and the opportunity is that the customer, it's right there. It's a captive audience, right, within the agency. So, and they're typically maybe right next door or virtually next door now because of COVID. But the opportunity that we have there, I think one of the first ones was around, really understanding customer needs. That piece is, there's probably assumptions that are already there. And we found the theme is we need to test that. We need to be able to do that. We need to utilize many modalities to be able to understand it and it could be done very quickly. And what we found is agencies during COVID have done that. They've been able to realize, hey, we have to be able to address that quickly based on the various requirements from the various rescue bills, et cetera, that forced agencies to have to move very forward very quickly. As Eric mentioned around IT as an example, that was a key piece. But I know, for instance, the VA had to hire very quickly because the VA was then in a situation where the fourth mission of being able to not only take care of veterans, but also take care of all of us, all the rest of the country, be able to activate the national response. They had to increase their hiring capacity. So a lot of the challenges within HR was more visible there and had to be shored up, right? And I think we have to do things there, and every agency, I think we have an opportunity, the learnings that we found during this past year, we have an opportunity to really double down and really make sure to use that as a driver for the attention. But through the customer lens, through the customer experience lens, we have an opportunity to do that. As Eric mentioned, yes, we know this is the way to do it for citizens or for veterans, for service members, for residents. We know that this is how we've been from a customer experience perspective. But the notion of, hey, how about internally within the agency it was a tremendous insight. The notion about vision and strategy, and I think this is a really important point here, is that typically, you may hear it, and I've seen it in strategic plans, and it's, oh yeah, we want to have this world-class customer service organization, right? But if we don't have specifics, very specific details of what that looks like, what does good look like, then we have a problem. And the agencies that we've highlighted in the report have taken those steps to do that. And that has been so helpful. It helps align everyone in the organization, because frankly, anyone that serves in government is there to serve and do the best that they can. They want to serve for the mission. Right. So how do we, and through this notion of customer experience and through this, it provides this really a very clear path to be able to accomplish the mission. And I would say highlighting the leadership piece, I think, is really key. And we'll see, you'll get to meet some of the leaders that, later on, the leaders in the report have highlighted, and I think one of the great success was because we had strong leadership. There was strong, courageous leaders that really kind of pushed forward with this approach. The building the customer-focused workforce and culture, I think, is really special when we think about customer experience. And I think any agency that has done that, any type of, whether it's on the front stage, the backstage, or behind the scenes, and we've seen behind the scenes, taking this approach really helps address the culture, because that's where it is. It's about culture change, right? And to make sure, and the way to do it, there's some very great tactics in the report to highlight how do we do that, and making sure, for instance, building the future, looking at the as is and the to be with the very customers in mind, bringing in the folks on the backstage, bringing in the folks on the work stage, on the front stage, to be part of the ideation, right, and be able to understand. Also, being able to highlight there's some great things that are happening within the work that the behind the scenes teams are doing, the work that HR, IT, and doing. Being able to highlight the goodness and really double down on it, I think, is something that's another key aspect that was identified. The focus on customer-focused solutions, I think this is, yes, we've heard of human-centered design, being able to be, this is really has to be at the forefront, because, and it gets to the point of, as part of the culture, let's bring in, again, most of the customers for an HR, for IT are frankly right next door or virtually next door, right? They're the ones that are maybe in operations or maybe within a certain program office. Bringing them in as part of the conversation to ideate will be beneficial to all. Again, that was another insight from this past year that has really excelled. And it's amazing that it was done in a largely virtual way. In a largely virtual way, it was done. So it's again, major kudos to the team. Next slide. And finally, the measurement and evaluation of the experience. I think this is, again, I know I say finally, but this should be really throughout. The ability to make sure from the very get-go, having the ability to listen from upfront, what are the opportunities that we could, how do we make those improvements? Being able to then, as we implement the solutions, how are we listening? Are we listening to make sure that it's getting the desired effect? Identifying, we talk about the key performance measures, but making sure that we are really putting that front and center. And we found agencies that have started to do that, like the VA has done with putting out an agency priority goal around customer experience. And again, that was more front stage, but why don't we put, emphasize the customer experience standpoint, our metrics from a behind the scenes standpoint? Really, really, really powerful. But we've seen, again, agencies this past year have done that, have put that as a priority, and then everyone aligned to be held accountable towards that. And the ability to then constantly measure, constantly evaluate, and this consistent learning cycle of being able to then make those, take those insights and make those improvements. We will, I know, Eric, I think you may have just posted the reports. I would highly recommend to take a look at those reports, those 2 reports. And it's a great read. Very proud of the work that the team has done. Again, thank you so much for all the leaders involved in making this happen and sharing this great work to the rest of us so that we could all, take those learnings and apply it in a true learning fashion. Eric, back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Hope you'll check out the report for more, but we're going to bring it to life for you right now through the panel discussion. So we've got 2 fantastic executives with us. If they can come off or come on to video rather and come off mute now, I'll introduce them quickly and let them introduce themselves. We've got Tim Gribben, who is the Commissioner of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, and Kim Walton, who is the Executive Assistant Administrator for Enterprise Support at the Transportation Security Administration. So 2 executives here who are leading large and complex organizations. They have a lot on their plates, but they are figuring out ways to keep their organizations committed and responsive to the customers they're serving. You can read more details in the report, but as I said, we're gonna bring it to life through a conversation this afternoon, and they'll share some tips and techniques and ideas with you all. Please do ask your questions through the chat. Use that function and I will have my eye on that. I've got questions for the panel, but I would love to have the audience asking most of the questions. So throw those questions in as we're going, and I will keep an eye on them and try to tee up some for the panel. At this point, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves, hear a little bit about who they are, what their work in their organizations are, and then also just a quick overview of who their customers are and what are the services that they're providing to them. So Kim, could you go first, please?
Certainly. So first of all, thank you to the partnership and Eric for including us in the study. It was very enjoyable, and TSA really has tried to build an enterprise support organization that is very much behind the scenes. But again, I'm Kimberly Walton. I'm the Executive Assistant Administrator for Enterprise Support for TSA. And so in my organization, I oversee all of the support services. So that would be human capital, training and development, IT, contracting and procurement, acquisition program management, and just for all of your knowledge, that is all of the checkpoint and check baggage technology that comes out of acquisition program management. I also have security and administrative services, which means I have personnel security, physical security, real estate, the OSHI program, and a couple of other programs that sit under there. So it is a lot. And I have a stellar team that's very, very focused on providing our services. So needless to say, most of you know we are a very large organization, around 64,000 employees, and they're all my customer. All of the people in the field in over 400 plus airports, all of the air marshal services and all of their offices across the country. We provide services to all of them, and at headquarters, we're our own customer. I remind my team all the time that we are also providing services internally to ourselves. We interact with employees from the moment they are drawn to our mission onboarding them, supplying them with their technology, supplying them with their equipment, whether it be their uniform, training them, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. We, of course, have a large slew of external customers, whether that be businesses that we're buying services for, consultants that help us in our mission, and people who equip us, whether it's the technology that we use at the checkpoint. And ultimately, our mission is to serve our primary customer, the traveling public. And I always say that if we do our jobs well, our front line, whether they be the TSOs or the federal air marshals, can keep their eye on the mission of protecting the transportation modes. So how do we do all of that? When we stood up as enterprise support and brought all these organizations together, we set pretty much 3 primary focus areas. One was to provide creative, integrated, and collaborative solutions to our customers. 2, to set clear service expectations. And 3, to be accountable to our customer needs. And it's really important that last one, we want to own our customer needs. It is not their problem, it is our problem. So with that, I am going to, turn it over to Tim to talk about his organization.
Great, thanks a
Great.
lot.
And Tim, as you introduce yourself, I think maybe you could also briefly touch on the first question we got, which is, how do you get the attention of senior agency leadership on this issue? So you are the head of your organization, and we'd love to know what caught your eye and inspired you to focus your attention on this issue as you introduce yourself.
Sure, actually. So I'm Tim Gribbin, and as you said, I'm the Commissioner of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. I've been the Commissioner for almost 2 years now, and prior to that, I was the CFO of the Small Business Administration. And the reason I say that is because I entered the Bureau having had the customer perspective of using fiscal services. And those are wide and varied. So within the fiscal service, we traditionally identified 3 different customer segments. One is the general public. So those who are paying their taxes, we provide the portal that allows customers or citizens to do that. Or if you're going to a national park and paying a fee, that comes through fiscal service. Or we opt for lockbox services that helps other agencies, like if you're applying for a passport or the immigration services, that all comes through our lockboxes, and we provide that service on the behalf of the State Department or CIS. So that's one group of customers. Then we also have the federal financial management community, which is a larger customer base that includes agencies, the industry that supports the agencies, financial institutions, technology companies. And then the third group of customers are the agency CFOs, and the things that we try to do to help them ease the burden and unlock the value so they can become that trusted strategic advisor for their agencies. And we do that through a variety of services. And I mentioned collection services, we have the payment services, and we also have shared services where we provide HR, financial management, procurement services on behalf of for over 85 agencies. And so how do we do that? Well, and now also we added a 4th customer, and we've talked about that today, is the employees. We hadn't considered that as a customer before, but we started calling it the customer and employee experience. And how do we go about instilling the culture of customer service? I did it through strategic planning. And we always had a strategic goal that was the customer experience and innovation. Well, a year and a half ago, we embarked on, started a refresh of the strategic plan, where we placed the focus on the customer experience and what do we mean by that, and what are the different strategies to achieve a stellar customer experience, and then also a refined strategic goal around the workforce and what the expectations that we have for the workforce, but also the expectations we have for ourselves on how we are going to provide whether it's training or capacity building for the workforce, was a way of communicating that to everyone within the Bureau. Then the other thing that I did was establish 7 priority goals for the agencies. We had a number of activities that we were trying to achieve, but we established 7 goals, and one of them is customer experience, and another one is the workforce. And that further drives home to everyone what our priorities are and what we are trying to achieve in terms of providing the level of the customer journey and the employee journey that we want to achieve and how we plan to measure it. So I'll pause there to say that that's how what we went about, starting at the top. These are the expectations, and then how to communicate throughout the organization to make sure everyone was on the same page of the direction that we were going.
Great, thank you. We've got some great questions coming in already. I want to pose one question to both of you, and then I'll get some questions that are in the chat. But our report makes the case that mission support services play a big role in helping agencies address big challenges. And I think this was certainly the case in both of your organizations when it came to the coronavirus pandemic. You both had really difficult roles to play and things that you had to deliver on during the pandemic. So I just like for both of you to talk for a minute about how did that customer focused approach help you deliver on those difficult challenges? Kim, would you like to start first?
Sure, thank you. One of the things that happened with the pandemic is things slowed down, travel slowed down, people stopped traveling. But our mission doesn't stop. So there was still some travel, which means that our frontline employees still had to show up for work, but we needed fewer of them. So we went to human capital and came up with some human capital flexibilities that we could exercise for our workforce. We reached out to see would they work. And so we created a special category for leave. We looked for alternative work options for some of our employees so that they could stay safe. But on the other hand, a number of our people in our workforce had to be at the front lines. And so that meant I had to go out and find personal protective equipment. And we've probably forgotten, but a year ago, getting things like hand sanitizer and surgical masks and gloves became very difficult. We were competing with every citizen all over. We had to go to some non-traditional vendors. And so there were some fits and starts because many of the vendors that we had to rely on, we had never done business with. The products that they delivered did not meet our needs. Some of the equipment that we deployed for protective, if you've actually been in an airport, you'll notice that some of our workforce, depending on which job they're doing, will have on not only a surgical mask, but a face shield. We went through maybe 4 or 5 iterations and of those face shields because they were hot and some of them steamed up. And so we had a subset of our employees and we had a subset of our airports that were testing them out. And in enterprise support, I even had them. I would wear them all day as I was doing my WebEx and Zooms. And I'm like, okay, this one won't work, and then I put on a new one. So, and my team was doing the same thing. We were trying to make sure that we were providing our frontline workforce with what they needed to be protected and feel safe. We had to go out and hire a sanitation company to come in and sterilize our checkpoints and our bins, which we didn't start off the year knowing we were going to do that. And so there were a number of things in that area that we had to do to protect our employees. And our relationship with the customer was key because we could call up a federal security director and say, we're going to ship you a couple hundred of these. Can you test them out before we buy thousands? And they were all very happy to assist. And I think we got to the right products very, very quickly. The other really good piece of the relationship with the support side and the front line is they started to put up plexiglass around key checkpoint areas. And so it was makeshift in the field. When we saw that, we're like, is this working for you? They're like, yes. And so we ended up going out and using contracting procurement to provide the plexiglass, which made our employees feel safer that had to come to work. One more example, we train 62,000 employees. 45,000 of them basically go to an academy down in Glencoe, Georgia. That was just not practical. So we had to take what was in-person training and convert it to virtual. And I still remember calling my assistant administrator for training and development saying, we've got to continue to train our workforce, but we cannot send them to our academy. And her first response is, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then a day later, she says, we're going virtual, working with the training staff in the airports. They built half of it virtual and then half of it online. They kept improving on it and got to a very, very good place. And so we didn't really skip a beat on making sure that our frontline workforce was trained, and we did it in a socially distanced way. So, you could train in one room on the computers, and then some of the hands-on was done in another room, and we provided the personal protective equipment. So COVID stretched us and stressed us, but that relationship that we had been building all along really bode well for getting to good solutions as quickly as possible so that we could be behind the scenes and deliver what they needed so that they could then turn around and provide the service to the traveling public.
Thank you, Kim. Those are some great examples. So Tim, your organization played a huge role in delivering on the CARES Act and helping make sure that money could be spent. So tell us a little bit about how some of the customer-focused work that you had been leading, some of the strategies that you had already employed, helped you actually do that and do it very quickly.
Yes, thank you. And there's, I'll talk about a couple of things, but one is that even prior to COVID, we had embarked on this. What do we mean by customer experience and how do you implement that in the organization? And part of that was relooking at the way we did governance, and that was mentioned in the article. And what I'll stress on the governance process is in the previous governance process, it was multi-layered and there was no focus on the customers. We changed it to a very streamlined approach, and there's a focus on the customer. So in terms of who's the customer, what's the problem statement for the customer, what's the customer involvement in the solution, and what do we mean by customer satisfaction and how we're going to measure it. That became part of our governance and the way we think. So that, and then when one of our business cases had to do with introducing robotics process automation. And that's another thing that was mentioned in the article. And sometimes I get questions of how did you get employees to buy in on that? And the answer was that we asked employees what are their pain points and how could we use automation to help solve the pain points for them so that they can do other things they suggested. In fact, through their suggestions, they keep pushing us to do more and more and more. Well, fortunately, we had invested prior to the pandemic so that we were able to speed up getting out funds faster because we had eliminated a lot of the manual processes that we had before. The other thing that we had going for us was that from a technology standpoint, all employees were already equipped with remote capability and collaboration tools. But what we did during the pandemic was survey employees to make sure we understood what their needs are and are we being responsive to their needs. And as an example, some of the things they said were, we would like to be able to use some of our own peripheral equipment like larger monitors or mouses or keyboards, which originally was not part of our policy. But hearing the feedback, we quickly were able to put that through governance and within a few days, we opened it up to all employees. As a result, employees were much more satisfied with the level of service they were getting from support. We also, when you talk about journey mapping, we also did a journey mapping of the hiring and onboarding experience for new employees. Because we understood once we realized we were going to be out much longer, we wanted to make sure we were getting it right. So we put together a guide for new supervisors on how to properly onboard new employees, how to start teaching the Bureau culture when you're not around people to really understand what that is, so they could feel integrated and part of the employee experience at the Bureau. So I would say that those are the things that I would highlight on some of the things that we did pre-pandemic that helped us during the pandemic meet customer and employee expectations for the services that we were providing.
That's great. And just a quick follow-up, anything interesting that you all learned about onboarding during the pandemic? Anything that stood out when you did that you all are trying to do and do differently, continuing that, assuming that you're still onboarding people in this virtual environment?
Yeah, so we actually, we defined, I would say from the onboarding perspective, we worked out a process on how to deliver equipment remotely if we needed to. Before, you always had to be on site to pick it up and to establish your credentials. Now there is the process of establishing credentials, but we worked on how you schedule an appointment in order to be able to come in and do it in a safe way. But I would focus on the training part of it and the expectations that we had for supervisors on training. And as another example, I created a welcome video to all new employees that helped explain what are the things that are important from my perspective for the Bureau, what are our priorities, what are our values, and so I think it's that is better defining the onboarding process, better defining the touch points that you need in order to provide that employee engagement. Because sometimes when somebody's coming in the office, you sometimes forget that they need a structured approach to introduce to who their stakeholders are, or how they need to get assistance, and the tools and the guides that we put together for new employees helped us retain employees. We didn't lose employees over the last year, which was great.
Thank you. So we have had a lot of questions in the chat about measurement. People always want to know about CX measurement. How do you measure customer satisfaction? How do you link it to agency performance? How do you know if what you're doing is working? This is something the folks at Medallia know a lot about, and we included some tips in our report around measurement. But I want to ask both of you this question. We can start back to Kim. Would love to hear how you are measuring satisfaction with the mission support services at TSA. What are you looking at? And then, most importantly, hopefully the data is not just sitting there. How do you use that information to then make some decisions and drive action in your organization?
So, I will start by saying that I don't think there's any cookie cutter metric that is going to be a magic bullet. So we do a number of things besides doing pulse surveys and building in some service level agreements that help us, that we work with the customer to develop. Creating a level of transparency on our measurements makes a big difference. And I'm going to give you an example. Some of our IT services, not surprisingly, with such a large organization, are delivered via a contractor that the feds manage. And we made a fairly large shift in how they deliver their services. And one of the main differences is some large airports and medium-sized airports used to have an IT person dedicated who sat in a cube, who you could just walk over to the cube and say, this isn't working. When we shifted contractors, the model really was much more of a service level. In other words, when you make a contact within a certain period of time, we will respond, and then we will correct the problem within a different period of time. Well, that wasn't well received in the field. You know, what happened to my IT person? I liked that person. They did other things for me. So the first thing is a little bit of transparency. There was a big cost difference, and managers understand that. You know, we saved a lot of money on the new contract that allows us to do more IT services that matter. So that helped, you know, level set everyone. So I do believe in being really transparent about, you know, why something has changed. The second thing is we shared the metrics that were built into the contract. We have a field call, and during one of those field calls, I attached it to the invite and asked everyone to take a look at it. You know, I didn't give them the whole contract, but I gave them the key measures that they cared about. And we talked about, you know, how that was working for them. And we're about to recompete. And so all of that feedback helps us, number one, know what was working, what wasn't working. So that's one example. Another thing that we did, and this isn't so much an easy metric, but I have all of my executives, we sort of divide and conquer, and everyone, you know, every month is reaching out to someone in the field. And it's an open-ended question. How are things going? And you don't just have to talk about my area. So the IT person may call and they may actually talk about IT services, but you can tell them about your experience on HR services. We take that, we capture it, and we talk about it at our leadership meetings to figure out what, in fact, we might need to be doing differently. The other, and I believe it's in your report, we put in place business partners for human capital. And there were a number of reasons we did that, but it was, you know, primarily to improve the customer experience. But that group regularly surveys their contacts in the field for feedback. And what we do with that is they brief me on it quarterly. And we sit there and we're like, okay, so how can we improve on this area? What are people telling us? And sometimes you don't get the metric right, because if you don't know what action you need to take to improve, that means you're not getting really good information. And so over the last year and a half that we've had the business partners, every sort of survey has given us better information so that we can provide better service.
Thank you. Tim, tell us a little bit about how you all are approaching measurement from a customer's perspective.
This has been, as you can imagine, a lot of discussion and how we were going to do that. And we talked about different ways of measuring it from an enterprise perspective. And I ultimately decided, because we were trying to further create this customer experience culture, where I wanted the Bureau to identify what do we mean by our customer personas, what do they look like, and how are they common or uncommon amongst our different services, and journey mapping, which we were not doing a good job of creating. So we put some goals initially around having journey maps as well as identification of personas. In addition, we've been doing customer experience measurement, customer satisfaction, I should say, measurement. But we're trying to get away from how do we measure the customer and the employee experience as opposed to the satisfaction of a certain point or a certain service. And so that's what we're still working on. One of the things that we have a concentrated effort this year, we have an action plan on how we're putting together our whole customer experience plan. And part of that is development of enterprise-wide customer experience measurement that's going to occur in the third quarter. And what we want that to lead to are developing those dashboard tools that leadership can use to centralize, to categorize, and to measure data, and in order to be able to accelerate our ability to be able to incorporate what we're learning into enhanced features or better delivery of our services. So that's kind of a long way of saying is that we were using the traditional measures. We know we want to make some changes. We're identifying what they can be. We had to set the foundations first, making sure that we can collect the data, and then we're going to work on what does an enterprise-wide approach for customer measurement look like.
Great. And I love that you mentioned that enterprise-wide thinking. That's a strategy that we highlight in our report. So many organizations kind of measure in silos. How is this contact center doing? Do people like our website? And they struggle to kind of see that people are interacting with all of those and jumping around on all of those different channels. And
one other different thing is of some of those individual ones that we've been doing, we've been incorporating human-centered design into what those questions are and rethinking the way we ask the questions so that we get better, more actionable data from the results of the surveys that we do.
That's great. Any examples off the top of your head of how you've kind of had to reframe a question because you realized the way we're asking this isn't really getting us what we need?
Yeah, actually, some of the questions around the onboarding of the onboarding services that we do for ourselves, as well as that we do on behalf of other agencies, the way we were asking the questions made us sound that we were doing great all the time. And we reframed the questions to really try to determine what were the pain points of a hiring process so that we can concentrate on that, understanding that the overall process is highly rated.
Great, thank you. Kim, one of the challenges you worked to address at TSA was there was a little bit of a disconnect going on between headquarters and the field. And you could see that, this is probably something that is a challenge in a lot of large federal agencies. So tell us a little bit about what that looked like and how you use that customer thinking to try to improve coordination between headquarters and the field.
Great question. So there was, you have your SMEs, your subject matter experts at headquarters, and they're writing policy, building, standard operating procedures, doing Q&As, and they package it up and they hand it out to the larger workforce. Here's the policy, here's how you do it, here's how you implement it. And what we found is the policies were being altered and tweaked when they arrived in the field. And I think initially the SMEs were thinking, that's a problem. I've provided you good guidance, you need to follow it, and you're just messing up a great policy. Well, with engaging with the field, and I, when I stepped into this role, would take 2 or 3 executives with us, and we would do a road trip. We'd spend time at various airports and some of the air marshal offices, just talking about what they need from us. And we would be telling them what we were working on and what would be coming their way. And then they would say, okay, well, that's not going to work. And here's why it's not going to work. Because you need to understand, how we operate in this environment. That was eye-opening. It was eye-opening, and we realized immediately that we needed to have multiple ways of getting their feedback before we issued the policy. It wasn't for them to dictate. Yes, we still have the subject matter experts, but we created various councils that we rely on. Some are airport focused, some are small airports versus large airports because they're very different environments. And we will bring them in and ask them, will this work? And I can give you another example of where it went awry. We were reducing our fleet, over the stand-up of TSA. We had a very large fleet, and we were right-sizing it, working with GSA. The SMEs decided that mileage was a good metric for which cars we were going to take back. And so that was our metric. We immediately found out that there were cars that had low mileage, but were being used regularly because in a big airport, think about JFK if you've ever been there, they were moving the officers, our TSOs, from terminal to terminal. So they weren't driving far, but that vehicle was critical to our operations. So we had to then recalibrate, and we asked the field, how should we do it? You tell us how many you can do without. And one member of the field said, I think I can do without half of my fleet, but don't take them yet. I'm going to park them. I'm taking all the keys. They're going to be in my desk, and I'm going to park them for a month. And after a month, he says, one person didn't have access to a vehicle. You can have them. And so just that collaboration just made us doing our job and saving the taxpayer money and reducing the fleet much better.
That's great. Thank you. We're starting to run low on time. I could ask questions about this all day, but I want to give each of you one more question, which is where to start. I think the folks here on the line have probably heard some great ideas, but people are often feeling like, I just don't know what to do first. How do I start making progress on this issue? How do I take the first step in an organization, especially if I don't have all the power, I don't have full support of my leadership yet. So if each of you could just share one or two ideas that you would recommend for folks on where to start in this journey. Tim, I'll ask you to go first.
So first of all, I'll say it's never, did you say Kim or Tim?
We'll let you go first, Kim. Go ahead.
So it's never too early or too late to get started. So let me just say that, never too early, too late. And I don't think that there's any really wrong way, but we did start with a vision that we wanted to improve our service delivery. And the second, I think, critical thing was bringing in our customer and, putting on our body armor and hearing the bad news. And it was ugly. And sometimes, at the end of the day of listening to our customers, we were like demoralized. But we shook that off and said, okay, what did we hear and what actions can we take to start shifting that paradigm? And we look for the big important wins. And human capital for my organization was the center. Because if your human capital doesn't work, people are out there miserable. And that's when we started with the business partners, because they were telling us things go in and they never come out. We send in personnel actions and then they die. And we don't know they didn't know who to call. So we gave them a business partner. We said, this is the person you call, and their job is to know what you've sent in, know where it is in the process. We actually gave them some authority to fix some things on their own. We delegated some authority, but also to track it down if it gets stuck. And so never too early, never too late to get started. Bring your customer in, be prepared to hear some bad news. Look for something that's going to be a big win, that's going to make a big difference. And as a matter of fact, Eric, this is breaking news. So we're likely to launch more business partners for the rest of the enterprise because I think they like the human capital business partners. They're like, now, what about the rest of the organization? I want one-stop shopping there too, so.
That's great, thank you. Tim, in our last minute, go ahead with your advice on where to start.
Yeah, so my advice is, so absent what I said about a strategic plan, you could start with what we articulated what we wanted to do in a white paper on customer experience that we shared with employees. And I'm pleased to say that the five steps and 5 actions that we articulated in that plan are very similar to the 5 that are in the report. So I feel like we were definitely on the right track with that. But we didn't stop there. We created a SharePoint site to provide a resource center for the inventory of personas and customer journeys. We appointed and I solicited customer experience champions across the organization is what we called them. So we have 23 individuals representing all the program areas that are working on the journey mapping, the customer research and identifying training needs. And then the last thing we've done is we're working on a reference guide that goes through a real life example through the 5 steps on what we mean by going through this customer experience from developing the baseline understanding to how you measure it. So that's my recommendation in a minute, or I guess 2, on how I'd go about doing it.
Great. Well, we are at time. I want to thank our panelists, especially Kim, Tim. You shared fantastic ideas, and you both are leading great work in your organizations that has such an impact on Americans across the country. So thank you for what you do. Thanks to Zach and Lee and our partners at Medallia for organizing this with us today and bringing their expertise and ideas to this work. And then thanks again to all the participants who took time to connect with us and join today. So I've pasted my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. We're doing lots of events on this topic and want to keep the conversation going and connect you with other leaders in government. So thank you again for being with us today. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.